Hey everybody, and welcome to this edition of rapidMATION Live. If it's the first time you're joining us here at rapidMATION Live, we stream all things intelligent automation. And we stream across two channels. One is LinkedIn Live and the other is YouTube Live. And in these sessions, we cover content over 4 different categories. And that might be interviews, demos, deep dives, or the ability for you, the audience, to ask a question. And the categories and the topics that we cover range from things like workflow automation to robotic process automation to artificial intelligence and more. Most importantly, if you want to be notified when we go live with these different intelligent automation streams, make sure you head over to go.rapidmation.com/live. Follow rapidMATION on LinkedIn and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can be notified when we go live with the latest content. Today's discussion, we have Wayne Acton, who's the automation architect at rapidMATION, joining us. And we're going to do a deep dive session today. And the topic of today's conversation is how to configure the UiPath Marketplace Components for both Nintex and K2. And this falls under the robotic process automation and digital process automation topics. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, rapidMATION is all about intelligent automation. And intelligent automation, although a bit of a mouthful, it's really about bringing together the worlds of digital process automation and robotic process automation. And if you've not heard of that before, robotic process automation is all about something called software bots. And these little software bots, they're not the Terminator-style software bots that are going to take over the world. They're little digital workers or software bots that sit on your machine or a server in your environment, and we teach them to do any tedious, mundane, or repetitive task by performing the clicks that you and I as humans perform on a screen. Now, sometimes these software bots might fail in certain circumstances, or sometimes they might need some assistance from a human user. And that's where we combine this UiPath platform with a platform called Nintex or K2. And what Nintex or K2 allow us to do is they bring us the world of human workflow, and we can assign tasks to human users to help us perform different pieces of work. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at how we've actually created bidirectional components between these two platforms. And there's 2 different activity packs that we've created for UiPath to make this possible. So if you head over to marketplace.uipath.com, search for rapidMATION or either Nintex or K2 in the search bar, you'll find these 2 activity packs. And what these activity packs allow you to do is seamlessly call either a Nintex or a K2 process from the UiPath platform. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take you through kind of each of these activity packs and how you can actually get them all configured to interact with your environment. So first up, we're going to look at the rapidMATION for Nintex activity pack. And to go and find out some more information about these different activities and what you can do, head over to marketplace.uipath.com/listings and rapidMATION for Nintex. And you can have a little walkthrough of these components and see all of the features and functionalities we've exposed through these activities. But to introduce you to what Wayne's going to show you next is we're going to show you how you can configure Nintex to do a few different things. Firstly, to define a Nintex scope, and that's the ability to connect into your specific Nintex environment. Then you may want to start a Nintex workflow, you might want to get Nintex tasks, or you may even want to complete Nintex tasks. So without further ado, let me hand over to Wayne, and Wayne's going to take us through how we can set that all up.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Sean. So what we're looking at here is the Nintex settings, settings and configuration panel. So what you're looking at here is where you can set up your apps and your tokens. Now, there's 2 different types ways you can programmatically interact with Nintex. Firstly, you can create an app similar to any other client ID and app secret that many other providers provide. You can also set up a personal access token. So the first one that we're going to look at is using an app. So what I'll do is I'll create a new app and then just show you how to set it up with the activity. Cool. So first thing is obviously you have to give your app a name. So we'll call this one rapidMATION Live. And we will make the description the same. As soon as you hit add, what Nintex is going to do in the background is generate a app ID for us and an app secret. Now, to see those, you need to click on the view button on the right hand side there, and it'll show you the app ID and the client secret. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy those. Now, what I've set up beforehand is just a UiPath folder with a bunch of different assets that we are going to need through this demo. So what I'm going to do is on the Nintex app credential one, you can see it's defined as a credential type asset. So if we go ahead and edit that one in, I'll put the client ID over there in the username, switch back over again, grab the client secret, and put that into the password one, because we want to make sure that's encrypted and it can't be easily exposed. All right, so now that one is in, what we can do is we can head over to UiPath and see how we can use this, the app ID and the app secret that's been created. Now, I've got a very basic UiPath process over here. We've got a config file, we've got a Nintex workflow file over here, and inside the framework one is the standard initialized settings that UiPath provides with their templates. In the Nintex one, we can see that we are going to call the init all settings one, which is just going to populate our configuration. And then we just going to get the actual credentials, which is going to be the app credentials. And then later on, we'll do one with a personal access token as well. All right, so what you'll do is on the left-hand side in activities under rapidMATION, there'll be an Nintex folder or category, and you'll be able to look at those ones over there. Now, because we're using an app or a client ID and client secret, we want to use the Nintex scope. So if I drag the Nintex scope onto the canvas, you'll see it creates this little block for you. And if we expand the properties over here, these are the properties that are required. So firstly, it requires an Nintex URL, and it wants the client secret, and then the client ID will also be on there. It's just not showing on the property screen over here. So if we head back over to the config, we'll see what we have defined in our config. So on the assets, we've got the Nintex URL defined over there. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that one. And I'm going to put it into here using the config, right? So just to show you the variables down here at the bottom. So we've got the config coming in, which is just your standard dictionary. And then we've got the app ID defined as a secure string, and the app, that's the wrong way around. Let me fix that quickly. That should be the app secret, and that should be the app ID. There we go. Now they're the right way around. So we can see when we get the credentials, we're asking for the Nintex password into the app secret and the app ID, the username into the app ID. All right. So if we head back over here, now what we want to do is start putting in all these details. So if we use our configuration again, and we're going to ask it to give me the Nintex URL and just put that to a string. And then what we'll do is that you'll see it's asking still for the client ID and the client secret over here. So we know that the app ID is over there, and then the app secret is over there. Now, as soon as I've provided all of those, the error goes away. And now your scope is ready, but we're not actually doing anything yet. Now, if we head back over to the activities, we can see now what do we want to do with this? Do we want to start the workflow? Do we want to get some task, or do we want to complete some a specific task? So let's head over and start a workflow first. All right, so on the start workflow, you'll see there's a couple of options that you can choose. So the first one is around authentication. So for the Nintex scope, when it's inside a Nintex scope, we don't need to use this because this is more related to personal access tokens. So we'll come back to that one in a minute. Then you've got your standard UiPath common properties that you can set. And here at the bottom, you've got the workflow ones. Now, the first thing that we need is a workflow ID. So to find a workflow ID for Nintex is relatively simple. So once you have a workflow that has been deployed, this is a very simplistic workflow. It's a component workflow that sends out an email. Very simple, nothing hectic about it. But you will see in the URL that it has the ID up here. So you can just go ahead and copy that. Now, technically, you would want to put this into a configuration value as well, because it's just best practices, because it will could change between your different environments. I am not going to do that. I'm just going to put it in directly just to show you where it goes. And then that's the workflow ID. Now, technically, that's all you need. If you're not sending any extra pieces of information into the workflow, that is the end of it. You don't have to do anything else. So what I'll do is I will save this and just run this one on its own. It'll start up. It's going to go and fetch its configuration. And now I'm getting an error, obviously, because I still have the Excel file open. So I'll just go ahead and close that. I'm not going to save it. And then I'll just tell it to retry. And there it is done. It's basically able to show you the output again, what it's done, got the settings, and it ended at the end there. All right, so if we switch back to Nintex over here, we can go and see the workflows that were started. Okay, so if I go and have a look at the specific workflow, and we look at the instances, I can see that there's just been a rapidMATION live one that was started, and it ran for less than a minute because it's obviously a very, very basic workflow. All right, so that's basically starting a new workflow. Now if we head back again to it again, we can also start it with some start data. So if we hover over this one, it'll tell you what it is expecting. So it's expecting a dictionary with a key type of string and a value type of string as well. So that's sort of the standard input parameters that that Nintex expects. And then let's say you need to start it and send in an email address. You can do all of that from the beginning. Now, I like to use an extension when I use the dictionaries. So I'll just go ahead and go and find that one. Is the Microsoft activities.extensions. If I can spell it properly, which is this one over here. So I'll just go ahead and install that one quickly. It's a pretty good extension pack, just helps you out to work with some activities or some objects. Okay, great. Now what I can do is I can go and define a new variable. We're going to call it just start data, for instance. We're going to change its type. And this one's going to be a dictionary. That one. And like I said, it's going to be of type string. And what I'll do is I'm just going to go ahead and set its default value to initialize it. So we'll see, say this is a new dictionary. And as you might notice, I am using the 2110 version of UiPath, which means that I could start a project using C#, which I really like. All right, so now what we can do is we can go off and say we want to grab one of our dictionary activities that was added in the Microsoft one. So I'm going to do this add to dictionary. And then I'm going to add a string value in here. This is just telling the activity what kind of dictionary we're working with. And we are going to tell it that it is going to be the start. That one, define it in the scope. All right. So as you can see, I put my dictionary in the do sequence over here. I'm going to move it up a little bit because I don't want to add dictionary. I don't want to add too many activities within the scope, because obviously then your scope starts getting quite big. So what I'll do is I'll just grab this one and I'll move it out to the top one into the Nintex scope, which is over here, which now means that I can use the start term, which is named a bit strange. So I'm just going to fix that. Cool. And now I'm going to give it a key. Now, obviously, we need to know what this key is. So if I head back to my Nintex workflow, and I'm just going to go edit it, So what we want to do is we want to define a variable for Nintex at this point. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say email address, and it's just going to be of type text. I'm going to create that one. And then what I'm going to do is deploy or publish a new version of this workflow. Now, what that's going to do is give me the ability to send the email address in. What I should have done before I published it was to set the to address to that variable that I'm going to be passing. Yeah. So we'll just give that a second, and then I'll do that. So instead of hard coding my email address in there, what we are going to do is we're going to insert from the start event the email address. And now that's going to come from there. We'll go ahead and publish that again. And then once that's done, we're going to head back to UiPath. I'll let that run in the background. Now, we called it email address. Now, how Nintex works, because this is on the start event, they prefix their variables with SE. So the SE stands for start event, basically. So we're going to do SE underscore email address, and we're going to give it a value here. Now, obviously, we shouldn't be hard coding things, but as this is a demo, we'll do it over here. And it's going to then send it to me. So instead of sending it, hard coding the email address in there, we can pass it into the workflow. Now, if we come back to the start workflow piece over here, we can do the add the dictionary in over here. So I'll just go ahead and give it the start data. And there we go. Let me run this again. There we go, starting up. It takes a little bit to get the settings just because it has to connect to Orchestrator to download them. And that one has ended. So if we head back again over here, we can go have a look at the workflows that's been started. We can see a new one has been started. And if we have a look at the instance start data, we can see that has been passed through. So that's an easy way just to see, you can start a new component workflow in Nintex, pass in any of the information you want, and it should return it to you. Okay, so that's a start workflow one, which is great. But what you can also do, and what might be necessary at times, is we might want to assign an Nintex task to a user, a robot user, and that robot needs to do some work and then come back and complete the task. So what we can do is we can use the get tasks activity. So I'm just going to comment this one out for a minute. And then I'm going to show you the get task one just to see how that works. Right. So if we go back to activities, we close this down. We can see under rapidMATION over here, we go into Nintex. We can see that there is a get tasks one as well. I'll drag that onto the canvas. Now, because I'm dragging it into the scope again, I don't have to reconfigure any kind of the authentication settings or anything like that. It's already done in the scope. So we've got a couple of input parameters over here that we can assign to the task to basically filter the tasks that we're going to get back. So the first one that I'm going to put in is the assignee. So I'm just going to put my name in there. And this has to be the proper, fully qualified name that your tasks are going to be assigned to in the Nintex workflow. You can add a from or a to status as well. Sorry, a from or to date, and you can define a status. Now, the status is the only required field that needs to be defined. Then what it also does, it outputs that tasks into this custom tasks output. So what I'll go ahead and do is just create a variable for the tasks. What you'll see is this is a list of Nintex tasks that comes back. Now, inside of Nintex task, you'll have all the different information that you need. So what we'll do is we'll add the required tasks, the status for the required task. Now, that one is, if you hover over it, you can see it expects a Nintex task status to come in. So what we'll do is we'll say Nintex task status, which is this one over here, and then we'll see all the options that we have available. So we can get active ones, all completed, or expired ones. So we're really only interested in the active ones. We don't care about the ones that's already been completed. All right, so now once that's all done, UiPath realizes that it's all good and it can continue. what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a for each onto this one. And just loop over those tasks. I'll change the name to task. And this then over here, we're going to go to tasks. And then we'll just change this one to a Nintex task. Now, as you can see, because we've added the Nintex library to the UiPath, all of these names now exists. Okay. Now, what I'll do over here is I'm just going to write out a couple of pieces of information just to show you what is coming in. So if we grab the task, just fix that naming there quickly. If we grab that task, we can see these are all the pieces of information that comes with a Nintex task. So let's grab the description, and let's also grab perhaps the default outcome to see what that actually gets us. Okay, cool. And that's basically that. So again, I've commented out the start workflow for the moment. We're going to get to tasks, and we're just going to quickly run through them. And we should see some output on the output window here as it is tasks that is currently assigned to me. So there's one task assigned to me, and its description was yay. So not the most businessy description, but it works. So as you can see, it managed to find one task that was assigned to me, and that it would have been able to see the task, get any extra information. Perhaps at the end of that, as you get each task, you might want to create a UiPath queue item behind that to go and do some work on the UiPath queue, and then later on come back and complete that task. What we'll do is we're just going to drag the complete task onto there and complete it with the default outcome. So if I grab the complete task, and what you need to give it the complete task is the task ID, so that you can get from the task. And then the outcome. Now the outcome, your task could have multiple outcomes. It has a default outcome, which is just the default one that will be picked. Obviously, you can use any of the other ones. I will just go ahead and pick the default outcome. And then it just takes a minute. There we go. So I'll go ahead and run that one again. There we go. And as we can see, it's come in and it has completed that task. So that's basically end-to-end, starting a workflow, getting tasks, and completing a task. Now, one other thing on Nintex that I want to quickly show you is, let's say you don't want to use the scope. So scopes do make your workflow a lot larger. There's a lot more sort of containers around it, and it starts looking, sometimes doesn't look that great, right? So this is where the personal access token comes in. So if you don't want to use an app ID and a app secret, then what you can also use is the Nintex task. So if I just come back over here, and I'm just going to copy the start workflow, I'm going to move it up here. What I'll do is I will comment out the Nintex scope, and I am going to put this down here. Now, currently, this won't work on its own because it's not contained in a scope. However, what we can do is we can just go back in here quickly. I'm just going to go copy the URL. So this is where this top part comes in over here. So you've got a URL over here, and you can pass it in directly over there. And if we go back to Nintex again, we can see the personal access tokens here at the bottom. So what I can do is I can create a new personal access token that expires in about a year. So if I go off and create that, it'll create that one over there for me. If I view it, I can copy it. And again, because this is a sort of sensitive piece of information, we want to put that into, just do that, put it into our UiPath assets. So I've got the personal access token here defined. Now for this one, the name doesn't really matter, the username, because we're not going to use the username. We're only going to use the personal access token. So if I go ahead and I update that one, if we jump back into UiPath, we'll now see that I've got this get pat credential up here, which it has been doing all the time. And I've output only the password, not the username, because again, we don't care about the username for this specific scenario. If I grab that, come back into start workflow and just put that into here. Now, what should happen is the same thing that happened before. It should start a workflow. So if I go ahead and just run that quickly, goes through the same sort of initialization, and then it should just start a workflow, but this time it's starting it using the personal access token instead of the app ID and app secret. Cool, and that's ended. If we jump back up here again, we can see that, just go back there, go back a step. We can see that there was a third one started now with, again, the same start data, all of the same pieces. So that's just to show you how you can use these Nintex activities.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Wayne. And in summary, that's how the UiPath components for Nintex can allow you to define an Nintex scope, start an Nintex workflow, get Nintex tasks, and complete Nintex tasks. All right, so next up, let's have a look at the next piece of configuration. And this time we're going to have a look at the rapidMATION for K2 components, which is the custom activity pack for UiPath. And again, you can go find the details on this activity pack on that specific URL. You can go get screen grab walkthroughs and details of everything that this activity pack allows you to do. But in summary, what this is going to allow you to do is easily integrate the K2 and UiPath platforms. And very similar to the Nintex components, it's going to allow you to define a K2 scope, start a K2 workflow, get K2 tasks, or even finish K2 server events. So Wayne, over to you.
Okay, so what I'm going to show you is the configuration around how to set up K2, where K2 is actually using Azure Active Directory as its authentication method. This is a very common scenario because, you know, with K2 Cloud, it's the way that it gets done. A lot of on-premise ones work the same, however. So the first thing you need is something called an app registration. Now, an app registration is an entry in Azure that just tells Azure that this app is allowed to use certain permissions. So what we'll go ahead and just do now is update and at least create this application. So inside the register application, your first thing that you need to do is give it a name. So we'll just go ahead and call this rapidMATION Live. Generally, for the supported account types, you should always generally use the organizational directory only. You generally won't use authentication for people in different directories. So that should be the default one. Because this is going to use the client credential flow in the background, we do not need to give it a redirect URL. So I'll go ahead and register that one. Azure goes off and it creates it for me, and it creates it with basically the default, with no real information in it yet. Two things that we are immediately interested in is the application or client ID over there and the directory and tenant ID over there. Now, if we head back to Azure, so what I'm going to do is just copy the tenant ID to start with, just to show you. So what we've got in Azure here is we've got a K2 tenant ID. Now, technically, this is the Azure tenant ID. It's not really the K2 tenant ID, but you can see the one that I copied is the one that's already in there. So that is just everybody that has an Azure instance will have their own unique tenant ID. Cool. So if we head back to rapidMATION Live, so the next thing we want to do is we want to define an app secret. So if we go down to certificates and secrets over here, this is where we can now define our secret. So if we could click on new client secret, we can give it a name. I'm going to keep with my theme of calling it rapidMATION Live. You can set how frequently you want it to expire. You can do a bunch of different options. We'll just go for 3 months for the moment. We'll add that in, and it's going to create the value and the name and everything over here. Now, it's important at this point to copy it because Azure will not show it to you again. So now that we've copied it, we can head back over to our K2 app credentials. Now, again, this is a credential asset because we want to make sure that this password is protected, or the secret at least is protected. So if I go ahead and edit it, you'll see I don't have anything in there yet that is of relevance. So I'll go ahead and copy that into my password. I'm going to jump back into here quickly. I'm going to click back to the overview and grab the client ID. So now what I'll do is I'll put that into the username field. So for the K2 app credentials, the client ID goes into the username field, app secret goes into the password field. So I'll go ahead and update that one. Cool. Now we'll jump back into here. Now, to be able to interact with K2, you need a few pieces of information. So I'll go ahead and click onto API permissions. So the default one that always gets created as part of any new app registration is the user.read from Microsoft Graph. What we want to do is we want to add a K2 API permission to it. Now, these will only exist in your Azure tenant if your K2 instance is already connected to your Azure instance. Because ours is already connected, I can show you what that looks like. So if I go ahead and click on add permission at the top here, and then I can click on IP APIs my organization uses, search for K2, and the K2 API comes up over there. This only has one permission that you can add, and it's basically to access the K2 API, and it uses user impersonation. So I'll go ahead and tick that and click add permissions onto it. Now, important to note here is the type of permission it is. It's a delegated permissions, which means that a user can access this permission using the app. It doesn't mean that the app can access it for all users. We will still need a user name and a user password to actually use this credential in practice. The further side of it is that if we were not to consent as an admin, that we would have to show the user an interactive logon screen so that they can say, yeah, I could consent to these permissions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do admin consent from here, because we are going to run this in an unattended way. So there's never going to be an instance where there's going to be a pop-up and somebody can click on and say that they consent to it. So I am consenting for everybody in our organization that they are allowed, that this app is allowed to use these permissions. And that is basically it. Your app is defined, and now you can jump into UiPath and start using all of these different pieces. So if we bring up the UiPath Studio, what we can look at the activities on the left-hand side over here is we've got rapidMATION, we've got K2, and then all the different ones. Now, what we want to do is we want to start off with the K2 scope, because we need to add in all the authentication details. Just before I get into that, again, up here, what we're doing is we're going off to UiPath and we are asking it for the app ID and secret we defined for our K2 app credentials. And we are also asking for the username and password for a user that I have defined. Now, let me jump into UiPath just to quickly show you that one, UiPath Orchestrator at least. And we have the K2 user credentials defined over here. So if I just edit this one, I set this one up earlier, but we've got a user in there called Bruce Brown at playplaycompany.com. And because I've added the password earlier, it's just empty at this point, but there is an actual value in there. So what I'll do is I'll just cancel out of that and head back to UiPath Studio. All right, so if we have a look in here, we can see there's authentication at the top here, Azure Active Directory details, and some common details, and then K2 specific details at the bottom over here. So we'll go from the top. So authentication will be the user that is going to be accessing this instance. So in this case, it would be a robot user or similar user that you have on K2 that is allowed to access this automation. So what I'll go ahead is just use the user variables that I've defined. So the first thing that we need to add in is the user password. As you can see, that's a secure string, and then the username as well. All right, so now that we get to Azure Active Directory. Now, like I said earlier, K2 Cloud uses Azure Active Directory, but on-premise might not. On-premise, you might just use normal AD. If you were to put in this AAD over here, it's basically asking you, do you use AAD or do you not? If you do, then you need to input these details. If you don't, you can put in false over there, which is just basically a Boolean field that says yes or no. And that would then authenticate against K2 using your AD server using basic authentication, basically. We want to do AAD authentication because that's a little bit more complex. So we're going to go ahead and say, yes, I am using Azure Active Directory authentication. So then what we need to add in is the client ID. So if we go ahead and add that in, and the client secret, which is the app secret, is what I defined it. And then we need the tenant ID as well, which sits in my config. Now what I'll just do quickly is just open that up again, make sure that I am not going to make a mistake while I type it in. So I'll grab that over there. I should have left that open. Okay, so that's basically what we need to figure out or to configure for the Azure Active Directory pieces. Now, the last piece that's still outstanding is the K2 settings. Now, what you need is basically a URL. That's just the URL where your K2 server is. So I'm just going to copy that and put that in. I'll open up the config again. And I'm just going to copy this K2 URL from there. Now, the other piece over here is the API version. Now, K2 comes with two versions of the API. There's a preview version and there's version 1. If you don't specify anything, it will just use version 1. So we will leave that empty. And that's basically your K2 scope defined, right? There's nothing else that you have to do in there. But now we actually want to do something inside that scope. So let's go ahead and do the start workflow. So I'm just going to drop that onto there. Now, what we again need for a start workflow is we need a workflow ID. Okay, so how do I get my workflow ID? What I'll do is I'll head over to K2 management over here, which is K2's management interface. And what I did earlier is I just created a very basic workflow and I deployed it. And to show you how basic the workflow is, this is basically what it looks like. It sends an email. There's two variables that I've defined, a body and an email too. So we got those two over there. So and that will just send an email out, and then it just assigns a task back to the originator, I believe, which is going to be Bruce Brown in this case. All right, so if we head back to K2 quickly, one thing that I do need to do is I just need to give Bruce Brown the rights to actually start this instance. So what I'll do is I'm just going to search for Mr. Bruce Brown over here. I'm going to add him in. And then I am just going to give him start and view participate rights. Cool. Now, as you can see, I'm clicked onto this. I'm seeing all of the information for the workflow. If you look in the URL, you can see there is an ID at the end of the URL there. That is your workflow ID, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, head back to UiPath, and put that in. Okay, so it will always be an integer, so that's why we're putting it in without any quotation marks around it. Now, what else can I do, right? Maybe I want to set the folio. Now, a folio in K2 language is sort of the reference number for this workflow. So it's an important field to set because it's sort of like when you look at all the instances of the K2 workflow, it sets apart which one is which. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hard code the one over here. And what I'll do is just to show that it's coming in, I will spell it properly. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm just going to add a datetime stamp on it. And we'll just do now dot to string. No, string, please. There we go. All right. So we can do that. We can set the priority. Priority can be high, medium, or low. I'll leave it on high. Expected duration is just something K2 uses in the background to determine how long this should take and when it's actually seen as basically outside of an SLA. You can also pass in the workflow parameters, which is what we want to do because those workflow parameters are the variables inside the workflow, and that is what it gets used in my email event. It will also return a workflow instance ID. So every time K2 starts a workflow, it will return an ID back to you, to tell you, I've started this workflow, this is the reference ID. Now, generally, you want to persist that somewhere to know for your process that you started, this was the instance that gets started. So what I'll do is I'll just output that into a variable. And then what I'm going to do as a second step is I'll just create a new dictionary, call it start data again. This is going to be of type, just to show you that. So K2 works slightly differently. It's similar to your UiPath config dictionary, that it's a dictionary type of string and object. Now, why it's an object is because you can pass in Boolean values, you can pass in integers, you can pass in string values into there. So it could be a range of different types that go into there. So it's defined as a string and an object. So what we'll do is we're going to define a variable over here. We'll just do a dictionary again. And this time it's going to be a string and object. All right. So now we're going to use our add to dictionary again. Here, we're going to tell it it's going to be a string and an object. And I'm just going to copy and paste that one, just so I have two of them. My dictionary is going to be start data. Both of them. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, just head back to K2 quickly, and I'm just going to copy my names from here. So email 2, I'm going to copy that one. And then the key is a string. So, that didn't copy it. Let's just go back again and copy it. So your key will be a string. Doesn't want to copy it. So we'll just have to type it in. There we go. Just make sure we spell it correctly. So we'll do email 2. And then what I'm going to do in here, I'm just going to put in my email address over here. All right, so that should do that. And if we go back again, the body that we want over here is called body. And I'm just going to put it in there. And then we'll just give it a body and say that. Cool. And then we'll go back to the start workflow and we will just pass in the start data over there. All right, and that's basically it. Now it's ready to start your workflow. So let's just run this and see what it does. Let me just, before we do that, I'll add a right line to the end, just so we can output the workflow instance ID that I created. There we go. And again, always a good idea to close your config file and retry it. Okay, just wait for it to do it all. And then it breaks because I didn't initialize my dictionary. Let's just go off and do that quickly. So basically, it's getting a null reference exception because my start data is a null at this point. It has not been initialized. So we'll go ahead and just give it a value, do string and object, and then we'll run that again. There we go. Now let's bring that output up again. We can see it's output my workflow instance ID over there, which is 3718. And that is basically the workflow instance ID that comes back. That is your unique instance to this workflow. If we jump into K2 management for a second, over here, we jump onto instances, and we refresh it, we can see that it is over there. The originator was Bruce Brown, and it's all started. So if I click on the view flow over here, just to see what actually happened, it came in, it sent the email, and it's gone over into tasks. Now, if I just click onto like any of the activities over here, what K2 does, it shows me basically more information around this workflow. Now, what I want to show you is if we go down to data audit over here, the body that was set to Hi rapidMATION Live, is what I typed in, and the email to was sent to wayne@rapidmation.com. Okay, cool. So if we then just jump back here quickly, I'm not going to run through creating the rest of the activities, but what I'll do is I'll just talk through them quickly. What you can do is also the same as on the other side. You can do K2 tasks. So you can go off and grab all the K2 tasks. Again, you need to give it the state of what it is. So just hovering over there, it'll show you what it is expecting. So if we come into here and we do K2 task state, which is the one over there, you have a couple of options, all allocated and available. Now, all K2 just returns all the tasks. Allocated tasks in K2 language is tasks that you have, but somebody else has already picked up these tasks. So generally, we don't want to bring those ones back. And then you've got available, which is tasks that you can pick up. I think there's an open one as well, if I recall correctly. There's an open one as well. Yes. So we'll do available for the minute. And then what it does, it outputs a task list. Sorry, go back there. It outputs a object called K2 task list. We'll put that out so I can just show you what that looks like. So that's basically this kind of object over here. So if we just jump back over here, if I just do a right line on here. So K2 task list looks as follows. So it's got two properties that we really care about. It's the item count, which is how many workflows were returned, or instances at least were returned, workflow instances. And then if you jump into K2 tasks, that is your list of tasks. So as you can see there, it's a list of K2 task list tasks, which is basically just, this is the actual task item. In there will then be your folio. If you've got a specific URL where the task sits, you'll be able to get all of those pieces of information over there. So what I'll do is, I know I said I wasn't going to do it, but what I'll do quickly is just add a for each onto this, because just to show you some of the things that come back. So we'll go into here. We're just going to do a K2 task. We open K2 task list, and we want the K2 tasks. What I'll also do is I'm just going to copy this right line and put it down and put it in a column. Looks like my Control-C does. There we go. Okay. So what we want to do over here is I just want to grab the K2 task list. We'll do item count, just so we can output how many tasks was returned. And then in the body over here, we just need to make sure we set it to the correct value. So we'll just browse for types here. K2 task. So it needs to be this K2 task list task. And then what we'll do is we'll add just a right line over here. And in this right line, what we're going to do is just show the folio, form URL, and we can show the priority. What else do we have to show? The event description, got the serial number. Now in K2 as well, the serial number is really important as well, because that is the unique indicator for the instance for that specific user for that task. So it gets relatively complex at that point. But let's see what else we can put out here. We can just output the workflow name as well, just to show what the workflow was. So let's just add some spacing between some of these, so it looks a bit better. Add bigger screen. We'll add those in. So that should now output those pieces for us. All right. So what I'll go ahead and do is I'm just going to disable these two over here because we're not going to start a workflow anymore. We're just going to go off and grab a task from a workflow. So let's just collapse those down. So we're going to do a get tasks. We're going to write out the count of tasks, and then we're going to loop through it and just write out the information we find on every task. Okay, so let me go off and hit play on that. All right, so it's going off to UiPath and it's asking it for its settings. And then it should go to K2, get all the tasks and run through them and output some information into the output window for us. There we go. As you can see, there was quite a few. That was output over there. Let's just bring that up again. So it's output some information for us. There's some task pieces over there that it has put out. All right. So the last one I'm going to briefly talk about that we have is the complete or finish K2 server event. Now, K2 has this ability to start a external application and then just sit there and wait for that application to tell it it's done doing its work. So what K2 could do, it could go off and create the UiPath queue item and give that UiPath queue item a serial number. When UiPath is done doing the work, it will call this finish K2 server event and give it back that serial number. So if I just drag this onto the canvas quickly over here, just to show you. So it expects a serial number from K2, to give back to K2, and then you can also give it the parameters. Now the parameters are over here is just your workflow parameters. So when you finish a server event, you have the ability to set specific parameters in the workflow. So that's another way that you can basically integrate K2 with UiPath, and that's quite a common scenario. We use something inside K2 called Smart Objects, which allows K2 to integrate with other systems. And then what happens is K2, let's say, calls out to UiPath, creates a queue item with some information, one of them being the serial number. UiPath does its work in the background and then calls back into K2 with that serial number and potentially setting some variables inside K2. So I'm not going to show you that one, but that's basically the flow that happens behind there. All right.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Wayne, for that deep dive on the rapidMATION for Nintex and rapidMATION for K2 components for UiPath. As a reminder, if you want to go get them and have a play yourself, head over to marketplace.uipath.com and search for either rapidMATION, Nintex, or K2, and those are the two custom activity packs that you're looking for. All right, that brings us to the end of today's session. So a reminder, if you want to be notified of when we go live with all things intelligent automation, make sure you subscribe to rapidMATION Live. And to do that, head over to go.rapidmation.com/live and follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to the YouTube channel. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. So please drop us a note on hello@rapidmation.com. With that, Wayne, thanks so much for taking us through it, and we look forward to speaking to you all soon.